Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani. We are live here with Dr. Jack Kruse, neurosurgeon. Again, really excited to have Dr. Jack back on the show. Again, Dr. Jack went to dental school, then medical school, and then a neurosurgical residency. The guy's a modern day Renaissance man, put a lot of time and effort in to get to where he's at now. So we're really excited to have Dr. Jack on the show.
Hey, what's going on?
It's not too much, man. You just got back from a neurosurgery just a little while ago, a trauma you mentioned. So I'm glad that we got a better connection here and we're connected again.
Yeah.
So we were just talking. Yeah, no worries. I mean, you're in the trenches. I love it. You're clinically getting your hands dirty every day. You were on call all last night, like you mentioned too. But before we got cut off, I want to bring back a couple of key topics you were mentioning. One was the top functional medicine mistakes, and you were kind of echoing some of the EMF stuff, some of the sunlight stuff. So I'm going to let you roll on that for a few. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, the two biggies for me, in my opinion, that we have to have everybody rethink their positions on their theories. One is SNPs, and the other one is probably adrenal fatigue. Mm-hmm. And I think adrenal fatigue, the number one thing that we both need to agree on is that the name should probably go by the wayside. Because functionally, it's a problem with the brainstem, and specifically the paraventricular nucleus. And that nucleus is supposed to be balanced by another nucleus called the vagal motor complex, and that's about 6 different nuclei in the brainstem. And basically, that system runs the parasympathetic system, and the paraventricular nucleus runs the sympathetic system. And when we talk about homeostasis or balance, those systems are designed to be yoked properly with the proper circadian signals that are present in the environment. The thing that people do not realize is when you alter the environment, it alters the response of all these brainstem nuclei. And the key way it happens is actually via the mitochondria. And mitochondria are, these double-layered organelles that deliver most of the energy in the body. And when I say most of the energy, I want to give people a really good visual so they understand it. And I think we can compare it to like plants, because I think that's a good way to start. When you think about plants are completely connected to the Earth's magnetic field, and the canopy is into the sun 24/7. So the reason they don't have to eat is they're pulling all of their electrons that are excited by photons in those two ways. They're not designed to move across the tectonic plates, so they use a different system. Most people know that system is called photosynthesis. The interesting part of us, since we're animals, more complex, we move across the tectonic plates and we're moved in and out of the canopy. That means that we have to have backup systems on us that plants don't have to have. And what people functionally do not realize is if they looked at a chloroplast and they looked at a mitochondria, they're exactly the same. Mm-hmm. Meaning that they were both once bacteria that what we consider endosymbionts. In other words, we took them and we changed their function to be an energy producer. Now, what people don't understand in animals is that on average, and I'm giving you an average human being, a 70-kilogram adult, needs on average to make 85 kilograms of ATP per day. So I want you to think about that for a minute. You have to make more ATP per day than you weigh. That is the function of a mitochondria. But here's where it gets really interesting. Food only provides 1/3 of the amount of electrons to make ATP. Well, guess what is supposed to provide the other 2/3? Sunlight. And how does that happen? It's a function of a protein on the inner mitochondrial membrane called cytochrome C oxidase, which I think most people know. And cytochrome C oxidase is a heme protein, just like hemoglobin in our skin. And what it does, it absorbs best in what we call the optical window. And the optical window goes from about 700 nanometers to 1400 nanometers, specifically in the red and near infrared range. And what does it do? It makes the ATPase spin much faster, and we create several things from that. Not only do we create ATP, we create the other 2/3 of the ATP that food don't provide us. But the other key thing is the faster the ATPase spins, the higher magnetic flux we create in the cell. And that's where magnetic fields come. And most people who are both in allopathic and functional medicine don't functionally really understand how the magnetic field is generated and how it's designed to alter as current that comes across the intermitochondrial membrane in the form of electrons. And all food, in fact, everything in the environment, okay, everything is functionally comes down to electrons. So if you don't believe me, most of your people listening to this, and I know everybody who's a doctor knows this, if you remember back to basic chemistry in high school, they said that just the change of electron shell changes chemistry everywhere. That's what valence chemistry is all about.
So electrons are really important. So talk about how do you affect, or how do you change or reduce the oxidation of these electrons? Because oxidation is essentially a loss of these electrons. That's what causes the rusting of nails out in the brain.
That's too far down the path. You need to understand something even more simple. How do we program electrons? Here's the interesting thing. Everything in the world, everything has electrons in it, okay? So how do we program electrons naturally? We do it by sunlight frequencies. In other words, an electron becomes excited. And when it gets excited, it goes up to this state. The difference between this state and this state is the redox potential. That's what you just asked me, but you have to realize what excites the electron first is the key. And the interesting thing, if you look at a mitochondria as it's laid out, cytochrome 1 and cytochrome 5, which is the ATPase, that redox potential is designed to go from about -400 all the way to 0 where oxygen is. So it's the same effect. So what is life's real goal? Life's real goal is it's figured out how to take an electron after it's been programmed, as it falls to the ground state, to capture the light energy that programs that electron. And that's what makes a tomato's electron different than a cucumber, than a steak that you just ate. And there is a frequency, a Rosetta Stone frequency in everything in our environment. And your mitochondria pays attention to that. That's the reason why I told you earlier that we're designed to pay attention to the environment, and it's not in an endogenous defect within us. The defect is created because there's a disconnection in the system in terms of how it's able to connect with nature. And the reason that's occurred for our species is because we think all the things that we come up with are really great because we don't understand the owner's manual, what's built into a mitochondria and how it works.
So how are we applying this with the sunlight? Is there an optimal time of day? What's exposure look like? What part of the body is getting it? Are you wearing the glasses all day long to block out the blue light? How are you applying this so you can get the maximal electron benefit in your life?
Well, Justin, you have a pretty interesting perspective already, because when we first started talking, I was outside. You noticed I wasn't wearing these.
Right.
You asked me to come into my office to do this because you would get better audio, and I was kind of like not terribly into that because I told you I was up all night on trauma call, and I just finished a big spinal reconstruction. So I've been inside. I missed the sunlight today. So I wanted the natural sunlight on me. I don't want to be around any blue light right now because of what I had to do last night. So what happened to me last night, the blue light that I was around from the operating room and everything else took my respiratory proteins and stretched them out. And see, here's the interesting thing. Those 5 respiratory proteins, cytochrome 1, 2, 3, 4, and the ATPase, which is cytochrome 5, the further they get stretched out, the less electrons can tunnel, meaning the current drops precipitously. And just so you know, what is the linkage between that? And this is very important for everybody to understand. Every 1 angstrom increase decreases electron tunneling between those by a factor of 10. So anytime you're in blue light, for example, I'll give you a perfect one for right now. Since we're talking on Skype, you're on a computer monitor and you have no protection on your thyroid gland and you have no protection in your eye. You are creating adrenal fatigue and hypothyroidism as we speak. And I don't care how much medicine you try to take to offset that. If you do that long enough, it ain't going to work. And the functional medicine paradigm says, no, if I replace this, I can get you back to normal. And I'm going to tell you, epic fail. Why?
Okay, so this is good. I'm learning a lot of new things. I typically do the blue light sunglasses at night to lower the cortisol and raise the melatonin at night.
Let me tell you why that's a bad thing. Let me tell you why it's a bad thing. Do you know there's a thing in physics where they talk about degrees Kelvin and the color temperature? You know what? When the sun rises in the morning, do you know what the Kelvin is when it rises? It's 1800 Kelvin. Right now, what you're looking at is 5700 to 6500 Kelvin. Now, here's where it's good news. You asked me to call you at noon. noon Central Standard Time, where we both are, that's when solar light is at 5,700 Kelvin. Do you know what it is around 5 o'clock in our Central Standard Time? It's 16,000 Kelvin. So here's the point that I'm trying to make to you. That change in Kelvin adapts over the day. Your pituitary gland, via the hypothalamic pituitary axis, that's the Rosetta frequencies that turn it on. That's where circadian biology comes. That's the reason why your testosterone is supposed to be highest at 10 a.m. But if you do what I had to do last night, or what you're doing right now, you're ruining that. You're also ruining your thyroid, because what people don't realize, our thyroid's exposed. Blue light penetrates all the way in to the fat layer. That is actually where the arterioles are. That's actually a problem. So when you're inside, I always want people covered up, because I don't want that effect. Now, when you go outside and you have this exposed, that's a really good thing. Why? Because 42% of sunlight is near infrared. It's infrared A. It's 42%. Do you know why? This is what we talked about before. Cytochrome C oxidase is a red light chromophore, meaning that it works in that window. And here's the biggest issue. What's the biggest red light chromophore that we have in our body? Water. And that's the reason why cells are 99% water by molecular size. And what surrounds a mitochondria? It's called the Minos layer. That's spelled M-I-N-O-S. What surrounds the ATPase as it spins? Water. Do you know there's very few things thermodynamically in the world that run with 100% efficiency? But guess what we found in the last 2 years?
What?
The ATPase, when it's surrounded by exclusion zone water, spins at 100% efficiency. See, that is the stuff that people need to learn in functional medicine to understand how to optimize people. Because if you take someone, say, who's an IT worker, is 12 hours in the basement of a hospital, inputting data for the hospital, and they have, retinal tears, their RPE in their eyes thicken, their glasses look like Coke bottles, and they have all these different things like adrenal fatigue, hypothyroidism, migraine headaches. You cannot fix that person with anything in your office until they realize that they are suffering from a light deficiency problem. And that's the key, because that's the levers that turn on this anterior semiconductive circuit that goes from your retina into your pituitary, and from your pituitary goes right into your brainstem to turn all these things on. And what controls them is the frequencies of light that are in there. See, we are beings of light, and people do not realize this. This is what the science of quantum biology has been teaching us over the last 100 years. But the problem is, if you don't read it, you don't realize what's already been published. And when I talk to people, people are really surprised to find out that this stuff is actually published. Like 10 years ago, I was crazier than batshit. Now you can go out and buy books about this and read about it and go, wow. Because I know when I went to dental school and I went to medical school, I never learned about any of it.
So what does this all look like from an application standpoint? Because I'm in the trenches seeing about 50 or 60 patients a week, and I'm trying to create diet and lifestyle application, shift habits to make the person heal or help them essentially put their body into an anabolic state. So sunlight, walk me through your routine. What does that look like for you? Daily basis.
Let me just say this. If you remember the equation I gave you before about ATP for a day, and food is only 1/3. Let me ask you a question, just for third grade math. Does it make more sense to focus in on 1/3 or the 2/3?
2/3, of course. So you're focusing on the
2/3,
reducing the EMF, and then getting the sunlight, getting the right exposure.
Well, that's where the 2/3 come from, and and that's the point. The point is, it's kind of like Dave Ramsey. Always go for where the best bang for the buck is. And
totally.
I get very frustrated. My members know my position on this. I don't think food is important as everybody else does. But the one aspect of food that's critically important is DHA, and it has to come from seafood, and it has to be, ordered in the SN2 position, because it has to be paramagnetic to get into the central nervous system and get into the peripheral nervous system, because guess what? That is the key chemical that controls the semiconductive pathway between the retina, the SCN, and the leptin receptor. And that's actually what controls the central retinal pathway that turns all the things on and off at the appropriate times that a functional medicine doctor wants and that an allopathic doctor wants, in fact, that a patient wants, but they don't know this. They don't know the level of complexity that's present there. And it's really important that we begin to teach people that. So, for example, the number one thing I tell everybody, the best healer in the world for anybody, I don't care what their disease is to make like the Sphinx every morning. What does that mean? Well, go Google a picture of the Sphinx. I want you to look in the direction of the sun, and I want all four extremities grounded. Why? Because when you're grounded, you have a complete wireless connection. It's no different than your coffee maker at home. Does it work as well when it's not grounded? The answer is no. The current is decreased. What do you know about current? Basic physics. Well, the slower the current, the less the magnetic flux is. What did we talk about before about that ATPase? We want that sucker spinning. We want it kicking out as much ATP as it can, because the more it kicks out, the less we eat. That's the real cause of obesity. It's not what everybody else believes. Oh, well, you're a fat slob and you eat too much and you don't exercise. Well, I got news for you. I got pretty damn good data that I actually ate more and exercised less and lost 150 pounds. And, you know, I'm 12 years out now, and I still have 130 of those pounds off.
Now I'm looking at your diet recommendations in your Epi Paleo RX book, which again, we'll put links down below so people can access that book. But you really talked about people overemphasizing macronutrients, and you want to bring it back to the micronutrients, and you really stress and emphasize the DHA for the electron benefits that you mentioned. But the bottom of your pyramids, primarily the shellfish, the oysters, the crustaceans, you also emphasize a lot about organ meats too. Now, those types of foods are going to promote a lot of insulin sensitivity, meaning they're going to help with insulin resistance. Is that a possible mechanism that help you lose a lot of that weight, or are you really putting it more on the sunlight piece?
What people don't understand in functional medicine, actually in medicine, that insulin is a solar hormone. In other words, you can eat carbohydrates at a high level as long as you live on the equator. And that's the reason why the Maasai are able to do what they do, and why somebody in Chicago can't do that. See, Chicago's at the 42nd latitude. Well, what's the power in sunlight? Are those electrons as power, or I should say the photons as powered to do that? The answer is no. And see, the reason why this is really important for people to understand, we are right now in a paradigm that is wanting to blame food and GMOs and all this. And I agree that it's bad, but it's not the key source. The key source is the altered light frequencies that we have built into our environment in ways that we don't even see. Because remember, our camera vision only allows us to see the center part of the visible spectrum. Guess what part we can't see? UV and IR. Guess what the single most important parts for regeneration in our system? Purple and red light, which is the reason why, if you look behind me and you see all the pictures, take a look at the picture on my wall. That's the brain looking at the sun. Okay? Look at the colors of everything in here. This is not just my opinion. These are reminders. When I come and do a podcast with a guy like you here, after what I did last night, I need to go home and get in the pool and do the things that I need to do to offset how I killed myself faster last night and have to recover. Why? Because I know how to recover. I know the prescription to do it. The prescription to do it is to get as naked as possible in strong sunlight and get cool in the pool while this is going on. Now, I happen to be fortunate. I live at the 28th latitude. Right now, the temperature out is about 90 degrees, you know, even though it's April. It's a beautiful sunny day. With my skin type, I will be able to probably recover most of my problem if I get about 2 to 3 hours. Now, is there other ways of doing it? You may know I built a device with one of my co-inventors called the correlate. Well, a correlate, even on its best day, can only replace about 10% of the joules or centimeters squared that sunlight does. So I always tell people nothing can replace sunlight. But if you happen to be, you know, say a neurosurgeon that does 500 cases a year and you rarely get outside, a correlate is probably a pretty damn good investment. Or if you're an investment banker or works in, you know, New York City, you probably need one of these. Why? Because we can turn your radial artery into another eye to deliver more light energy in that optical window to do what? To make that ATPase spin faster.
Okay, so let's talk about what your kind of a day in the life of Dr. Jack Kruse is. So forget the fact, right, you're called in for trauma surgery last night. So if you have the ability to wake up, how are you getting all four extremities grounded at the same time? Are you in the water? Are you lying on your back? What does that look like?
Yeah, for me, the simple thing is I go outside and I have a place where it's grass right out my front door and the sun comes up right there. Most people are friends with me on Facebook. I usually take the picture of the sunrise and send it to people and show them. I never miss. I missed today, which is kind of what pissed me off. But and I usually will squat down, put my hands down. Sometimes I'll sit Indian style with my hands down, and I make just like the Sphinx. And I do that for about anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes. It's easier, obviously, when I'm in different places, like at the beach or in Mexico. But that's been a routine of mine probably for the last 12 years. And the reason that you want to do that, you are resetting 2 light signals in your body, both the vitamin D cycle and the vitamin A cycle. And the vitamin A cycle happens to be the most important cycle in the morning. Vitamin D is not important because, remember, no matter where you are, except on the equator, you don't make any vitamin D until UVB sunlight kicks in. Well, even on the equator, it's not present at the AM dawn. The key thing that's present there, the most powerful part of light, is usually UVA or more infrared. It takes about an hour on the equator for it to show up. But where most of us live, outside the tropics, you don't make that until a lot later. And people are surprised to hear this. The key frequencies in the morning is blue light. And blue light is good when it comes from the sun, because that's the switch that actually tells the pituitary gland to make all the hormones that
the cortisol ramped up.
Right. We make all the hormones that are secreted between 6 and 10 o'clock. Here's the interesting part of the story that people don't realize. Do you know what the off switch is for the pituitary gland?
Melatonin.
UVA and UVB light. When the sunlight hits your skin, what happens? You release nitric oxide, the arterioles come to the surface. Where
of course. Yeah.
The porphyrins are, and guess what it does? It turns off all your sexury hormones. So I want you to think about something. If the first light you see every day is your computer or your cell phone, and I already told you that's 5,700 Kelvin, are you going to be able to turn on the signal since it never sees 1,800 and gradually goes up to 5,700? The answer is no. You just told your brain that it's the middle of the day. In other words, you slept all day until it's noon. You just created a mismatch, and you don't even realize you created this mismatch. And that's the reason why when people do this for 2 to 3 weeks at a time, when functional docs or allopathic docs order, say, all their melatonin, cortisol, and their sex steroid hormones, they're always flat. And, you know, people always talk about like an adrenal fatigue, that everybody's completely crashed and low. But what you guys tell people and what I tell people, the reasons why, are radically different. And it completely is tied to light cycles. And it can only be fixed until you understand the light cycles and how this anterior visual pathway works in the eye. Because the 2 major ways that we get light in are through the eye and through the skin. The mechanisms are different, and the proteins that we use to do it are radically different, but the ones that we started off talking about this morning, you know, with the sunlight as it rises, is the vitamin A cycle. Why? Because anytime blue light comes through the eye that has low color temperature, it separates retinol from the photoreceptor. And that separation has to then be recycled. The other thing that happens, that turns over DHA in 2 loops of the retina. One's called the short loop and one's called the long loop. If the vitamin A cycle is right, the short loop completely recycles DHA. That means you don't need to eat a ton of seafood. That's the reason why people on the equator don't have a big need for fish. And if you look at the fish that are endogenous on the planet, they're low DHA sources.
So are you saying that if you're saying people were on the equator, living on the equator, but they were still eating a refined kind of junk food diet, you're saying that they would be able to sidestep obesity if the EMF
Correct.
And the UV light was dialed in?
If they had strong light cycles. That's the reason why we have indigenous peoples who live inside the tropics. Like the perfect one for you to learn about is the Maasai and also the Hazda. They're able to eat very high carbohydrate diets. And the reason why is because they live in a strong UV and IR environment. The problem is all your patients and my patients don't. They never get there. And that's the reason why we have the false precept that carbohydrates are bad. They're not bad. The environment that we're in makes them appear bad. And that perception is important.
So how are you applying this with your patients? Are you seeing these functional medicine patients one-on-one? What kind of clinical results are you getting using these techniques?
I mean, that's part of the reason why I came down to the Gulf South, because, you know, down here we're 50th and 50th in just about everything. Everybody's a train wreck. But the cool part is that all the how shall we say, the recipe for recovery is built into this environment. The problem is you got to get them clicked in. And I'll give you a perfect example. Where I am in the Gulf South, 100 years ago, when it was really hot, people would be outside on their porch drinking mint juleps and having cake and doing all these things. What happened over the last 100 years? Now when it gets hot, people come inside, out of the sun, into air conditioning. Well, that means the best time for you to be outside, they've been brought inside. What has technology done? The same thing. It's brought us out from outside to inside. So let's talk about the flip side of that. What do people in the South do when it's December? Like when it gets below 50, people here look like they're dressed for the Arctic. When in reality, what should they be doing? This is the perfect weather. Like if you ask somebody who's from Chicago, 50 degrees in December, they would be like 2 thumbs up. They'd be I'm all in. And people don't realize that your eyes and your skin pay attention to that. And Justin, talk about this, me and you. I mean, you have a shirt on, I have a shirt on, we have clothes on. That's society's beliefs that's been put on us. But let me ask you a question. When you crawled out the vagina, did you have any clothes on? Stop for a minute, and I want you to think about Discovery Channel. Do you know any animal that comes out of its mother's vagina that has clothes on?
Of course not.
Okay, so let's think about this. When me and you get together at some point, we plant a tree, you put all the nutrients in the water in the ground, but I put a tarp over it. Will that tree live or die?
Absolutely won't live. So
guess what? The first species ever created was 700,000 years ago when we started to wear clothes. Got it?
So sunlight's incredibly important. You made that clear. I think you made some good points on that. And what does that look like for you though, from an exposure time, and how do you prevent getting burned and getting all this collagen deterioration from the excess sunlight?
I'm not worried about that. That's a bunch of horseshit. Okay. The bottom line is I was looking to see where my cell phone is, but I'll just tell you, there's an app called D-Minder that Dr. Robert Holik from Boston University has built. You can get it down there, and what it does, it downloads your GPS coordinates where you are, and it tells you precisely how much sunlight you're getting and how much vitamin D you make. So the easiest way for the novice to learn about their light environment is, to download this app and begin to play with it and see how much vitamin D you can make at your specific location, at your altitude, because what people don't realize, the 3 variables for vitamin D function are latitude, altitude, and population density. And population density is the one that most people don't understand. The more you live around other obedient idiots, the more you get dehydrated because they're all using non-native devices. And the reason why this is an important thing, and why you see me here drinking my Green Mountain Valley water, is the isomerization step of vitamin D3 that occurs in your skin requires you not to be dehydrated. Otherwise, your cholesterol will be really high, and your vitamin D3 conversion will be low. And that pretty much describes just about everybody with diabetes and metabolic syndrome. In fact, I think the epidemic in most patients with lipids is tied to this factor. And anybody who then says, well, giving them a statin makes any sense, what does a statin do? It actually increases the respiratory protein distance. And we already talked about why that's a bad idea. What is the link between cytochrome 3 and cytochrome 1? For your listeners who don't know, it's called coenzyme Q10.
Yep.
Coenzyme Q10 ferries electrons between those cytochromes. So if you're stretching them out, are you making cytochrome C more happy to make more ATP or less happy? And see, that's what I'm saying. When you understand how the system is built, you begin to start to go, yeah, why are we doing some of this? This doesn't make any sense. But the key factor, the reason why we continue to miss both in functional medicine and allopathic medicine is because we're focused on food and not on light. And that's the key problem because of that 2/3, 1/3 thing. And I want to make one other point, Justin, while we're here. This is very important. For those people who don't get the science side, let's give you another analogy to understand it from, say, a car. If you and I went out and spent $250,000 and we bought a Ferrari, we pooled our money together, does it make more sense to focus in on the fuel? Like, should we put 87 in, 90 or 93 octane? Or does it make more sense to make sure that me and you spend our money tuning the engine up so it can go 220 miles an hour all the time? See, that's the difference between functional medicine and a mitochondriac. And I'm a mitochondriac. You guys focusing on food. Dude, I don't even want to talk about food. The only time I want to talk about food is when we're talking about electrons and protons, because the input in mitochondria is called electron chain transport. It's not called protein transport. It's not called carbohydrate transport. It's not called fat transport. And until you come to my level, I refuse to go to anyone else's level, because nature has built this into us. It's there. We know about it, but we ignore it. Why? Because the science is too hard for some people. Well, I'm sorry. It's our job to understand how these things fit together. And until we give people the truth, not a half-truth, we're going to continue to struggle. And I look at it like this. Everybody who's a practitioner, we're all in this together. We all want to do the right thing, but we all got to start focusing in on it. Like when you go to your next functional medicine, talk, I hope you get up at the microphone and you say, hey, let's think about this. How could this go in there? Be a provocateur. Because they're not. Until people start talking about these things, we're not going to change anything, Justin. And to be honest with you, that's why I do podcasts. That's the reason why I like to go out and talk to people, because I want them to understand, A, am I crazy? Or maybe do I have some interesting perspectives that people haven't thought about? And then B, I want to direct you to things that are published and books that are written that show you that, hey, maybe this is something we have missed. Maybe we've been stepping on this stone at the 6th floor level instead of going to the 1st floor level. Maybe that's the reason why people still want to give rhodiola to people with adrenal fatigue, because that's not going to work until you fix their environment. And I always tell functional guys, rhodiola works because they have excited electrons from the damn sun. That's the only reason it works.
So if we create a checklist here, so the patients, people listening have that checklist to optimize their light exposure, what does that look like? So we get up, we see the sun rise, we get all 4 extremities, we do the Sphinx, as you said, right? We dial that in, we get, what's the exposure amount look like? And are we just trying to get it in the morning? What does the rest of the day look like? Can you go through your daily routine with sunlight?
I would go through my routine, but remember, my routine is based on my N=1, and that's why I was going to qualify for you. And as a practitioner, you have to start to realize that what you're going to recommend to one person is not the other, because what are the variables? A, what diseases they have, how bad are their mitochondria, what's their heteroplasmy rate, what's their haplotype look like, what's their job, what's the goals? There's a lot of different variables, but for me, I'll give you a perfect example. I know that my day job as a neurosurgeon is my single biggest risk. So for example, days that I am in surgery, I spend more time in the sun than I would in days that I'm in clinic. Anytime that I have a chance when I'm in clinic to go outside, I tend to go outside as much as I can. So a lot of people would call that coffee or smoke breaks. I call it a sun break. Even if you get 5 or 10 minutes at that time, it's a help. Anytime you're out in nature, it's a help. So the answer is try to do it. Anytime that you can be connected. For example, all my
Are you worried about getting burned too, though? Like
no, not me. And you can see that I'm Irish and I have freckles. 10, 12 years ago, I would be out in the sun and I'd get burned pretty quick. But I've built up a solar callus. Why did I build up a solar callus? Let me explain something to you, and you'll probably be interested in this. There's 2 diseases that you know very well. One is psoriasis. The other one is type 2 diabetes. Do you know what's common to both of those diseases? The skin gets thicker.
Okay.
And you know why the skin gets thicker? Because the skin is looking for more sunlight. People who are diabetic usually are designed to be in a strong UV environment. That's the reason why they eat carbohydrates. Carbohydrates will naturally thicken your skin. It turns out in psoriasis, the lack of UV light thickens the basal level. That's the reason why dermatologists use 312 nanometer light to shrink that level and the plaques go away. That's what the plaque is. It's thickened, high turnover. It's almost like a precancerous state. In fact, if you look into the science of psoriasis, you'll see everybody who has psoriasis, they'll tell you it's a pre-malignant state. You have risk factors for other cancers. Why is that? Because you're not near the regenerative light sources, which is UV and IR light. So what's the answer? You just asked me. Go outside. Because guess what? The shit outside is free. But
so how long does it take you to build up that tolerance so you can get that solar callus?
Took me about 2 or 3 years, but Did I know what I was doing when I started? No, because all the variables that I just told you, I didn't really realize how important they are. Now I do. Now, you know, I have a K haplotype. My heteroplasmy rate, I've got it pretty dialed in because I've been a biohacker for about 12 years. On average, I would say in the wintertime, I need about an hour and a half to 2 hours. In the summertime, I usually go 3 to 5 hours per day.
In the sun. And you're doing no sunscreen at all?
Dude, there's no freaking chance that I would ever wear that.
And you're not burning at all either?
No, well, if I get burned, if I get red, I have no problem. The next day I come out and I look like the way sun is designed to work. This is probably a really good thing for people to hear. You're designed to absorb all the UV frequencies in your melanin. So my freckles hold the UV light. That's where all the excited electrons are. At nighttime is when you offload those into your system. So you would notice if you hung out with me for 3 or 4 hours, say now in New Orleans, the next morning when you saw me, I wouldn't be as pink. And why? Because I've offloaded those things into my cellular structure. See, the problem is you have to think about your cells kind of like a plant. When it's really thirsty for water, that is going to be delivered to the places that need it the most. So think about your skin. Most people have their arms exposed, but they don't have their belly or their legs and this and that and other things exposed. So those parts of your body are starved, absolutely starved for light. So if you're smart, you start looking at, okay, what do I always have covered all the time? Those are the parts that I need to keep uncovered and get out there. And what you do is you slowly build up your solar callus. And you do this through what I call mitohacking. You start to figure out empirically how your system is optimized. It's no different than looking at the dashboard of your car and figure out, okay, look, my temperature's too high, I need more gas, I need to do this and that. The thing is, we're not teaching people the variables in allopathic medicine or in functional medicine. And if you go to one of my blogs, it's called the Redox RX blog. I give you 30 different labs that link directly to the redox, and it tells you how those things are linked to the redox. So you read this, and you start looking at your labs, and you start going, okay, I'm going to start doing this. Let me see how these things go up and down. And when people start to see how it really goes, and they start to become what I would call more connected with nature. In other words, you reconnect with nature. See, your wireless relationship to the sun and your complete connection to the earth through your feet or through leather-soled shoes, this is something you can't miss. And if you don't fix this, I don't care what you or I do in the clinic, it ain't gonna work.
Got it. So with the glasses, you're wearing those glasses all day long. Is that correct? Not just at night?
No, I'm wearing those glasses anytime I'm inside.
Inside.
In this light that you're making me look at. You know that I didn't have these on when we first started talking.
No, you were out in the car and you had the sunroof open and you were getting good exposure. Totally.
Exactly. And that's the point. And the thing is, one of the things in functional medicine that I think they can lead on, because it's not talked about enough, is that we need to wear protection for blue light during the day when we're inside. We really do, because people don't understand that circadian variation occurs. That's why I wanted you to understand it goes from 1800 Kelvin all the way to 16,000 Kelvin. The computer screens are optimized. Most computer screens between 5,700 and 6,500 globally by the technology companies. So if you're working all day and say for 10 hours or 12 hours seeing patients, that means that you're getting a complete solar signal for noon the whole day. What do you think that does with your central retinal pathway? What do you think that does to your HPA axis? What do you think that does to your brainstem? And then you wonder why the people that are coming into you are zombies and they're trashed. But the problem is selling them pills and herbs aren't going to fix that problem. That's like, I have a saying that I get in trouble with some of my patients. It's like pissing in the wind.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. So just so I understand your routine, right? 1 to 2 hours in the winter, you're 3 to 5 hours in the summer, correct?
Like today, I can tell you when I get done with you, it's going to be a lot because we don't get, just because of what happened to me yesterday, I will increase it, but I'm going to use something called the Fournier effect. How am I going to get more sunlight? Because it's already 1 o'clock. I'm going to get in the pool and stay in the pool and keep the top half in the sun. Then I'm going to reverse it, where I'm going to put my head in the water a lot, keep my top part of the body out. And the reason why is I'm creating a bigger circuit so I can move current more through my body. And I'll do that this afternoon to offset what I did last night, because I know last night I killed myself faster. And that's why I tell people all the time that health is the slowest form of death we create.
Got it. So you're not worried about any collagen degradation or any skin cancer at all with the sun exposure. You feel like you're doing it in a way where you're not burning per se. You're building up that solar.
Right.
What was the word?
Solar callus.
Solar callus, the melanin exposure. Yeah.
Well, it's not only that, it's also your skin thickness becomes optimized. The thing that becomes interesting, you need to realize what your optimal amount of sunlight is per day. And it's pretty easy to figure out within 4 to 6 weeks. The real problem that most people are going to find if they live at the 42nd or the 50th latitude, they're going to realize that is a problem. Like, for example, that's the reason why people have MS have a big problem. And the reason why is they live at the wrong latitude because their mitochondria are not optimized for that latitude. And it's magic when they go south. Well, here's the problem. Telling people who have MS, like, there's a functional allopathic medicine doctor who's pretty famous in Iowa State, Terry Walsh. She tells everybody you can mind your mitochondria through eating vegetables, and I just scoff at it. And if she was so right, she's got her MS better because she's doing well. Is she reversed yet? No, she's not. And you know why? You know where Iowa is? It's the 42nd latitude, my friend. You want to get it better? Guess what? Go down to Playa del Carmen. You want to do even better? Go down to Ecuador.
Now, how much of that has to do with vitamin D as well? Because we know there's a big correlation with the vitamin D. So if you are at the higher latitude, what can you do? Can you supplement vitamin D? What kind of lights could you put in your house to maximize that?
The question about supplementing sunlight, I have a blog. It's called Time 11. The title of it says, can you supplement sunlight? The answer is no, because when you give somebody a supplement, what did you just do? You learned in school that we are a series of negative and positive feedback controls. So when you designed to make something in the body and you take an exogenous source, you completely uncouple that system. You actually make it worse.
But if someone's in that environment, what can they do?
Change the way you think about it.
You're saying move, change, or?
Well, move or go up to a higher altitude. Like, for example, I have a member who I'll share one of the things he did. He lived in Seattle, and he knew that he had this big problem. He's become a huge mitochondria. He's got all the gear. And what did he find? He found that if he went to Bend, Oregon, because it's at a 5,000 foot elevation. What people don't realize, when you go above 5,000 feet, you can naturally raise your vitamin D levels even if you're at a high latitude. That's the reason why the Swiss do so well in the Swiss Alps. But yet people in Finland and Helsinki have record rates of autoimmunity, diabetes, and obesity. And that's the reason why. Now, the other effect, the big effect for the United States, is population density. So if you happen to live in a very populous state, I don't care if you're naked outside on Rodeo Drive in Los Angeles, you're not going to raise your vitamin D. And I talk to functional docs all the time. They're like, Jack, you know what I can't understand? These people live in San Diego, they live in Los Angeles, and I check their vitamin D and they're at 31. I put them on 20,000 a day with 5 milligrams of K2. They come back and they're at 38. He goes, they just don't understand why. And I said, it's pretty simple. They're all dehydrated. And the reason why? I said, check their BUN creatinine ratios. Just do a regular Chem 7, and invariably you'll see they're over 15-1. And I explained to people the reason why. The isomerization step is blocked. Yep. It needs water to make vitamin D, and people don't understand this. So when I hear people default straight to the vitamin D thing, it's either because they have to make a Mercedes payment or they're trying to get people on a program. That's not the answer. And the thing is, we're going to make those people worse if we just throw vitamin D down their gullet. Now, let me get a flip side. Since I'm a surgeon, I'm trying to deal with these issues on a much more acute basis. And if I can raise somebody's redox potential by utilizing these things during that time frame, those are times that I'll use it. But what do I always make sure to tell the person? We're going to do this in the perioperative period, but then you're going to change. And if you don't, I'm not going to see you anymore.
So what kind of case studies do you have? Do you have patients that you've seen that you're making these clinical changes with, adding these different protocols, and what kind of clinical outcomes are you seeing? And then also, what if people are doing these things and they're not getting better? What do you look for next?
Well, that's when you have to become a biohacker of the environment. In other words, there's something in the environment that you don't see. See, here's the big risk for most people. Non-native EMF. See, your mitochondria is a sensor that's connected to all the waveforms in your environment. Non-native EMF, you can't see, sense, taste, or touch, but your mitochondria does because of that oscillation that I told you earlier. So the key is, that's when you have to start to buy gear. For example, you know that none of us can see X radiation, and none of us can see radiation decay. But if you had a Geiger counter, you could see it. Well, there's things called the trimeter. There's a thing called the Gauss meter. That's when guys like the friend I told you about from Seattle, I teach people how to go out and biohack their environment. When they do that, then they find their problem pretty damn fast. And they're like, whoa. I mean, I've had people literally did not even realize that where their power source coming into their house was right where they sleep. And I said, okay, well, if you're not going to change it, then what you need to do is have the electrician out to put a kill switch to kill it. I'll give you, if you got some time, I got a great story of one of my members in New York City. This will blow your mind.
I want to hear it. I'm going to grab my trimeter real quick. Hold on. So this is the one you're referring to, right? The tri-field meter? Mm-hmm. And how are you using this? How are you applying it to look at EMF sources?
That's only one thing that I'll use. The one other big one is probably the most important one, especially for the coming 5G explosion, is going to be a Cornet 88F RF meter. RF radiation is horrible. Mm-hmm. Almost anything that uses a pulsed electromagnetic frequency, PMF, it's talked about in health circles all the time.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not a big fan of anything that uses PEMF.
You don't like it, huh?
No, it has to be understood. I like it, but it has to be understood. And most people who are prescribing these things don't really understand truly what they're doing to people who have these problems. So the easiest way to really understand your environment is when you see these bad signals, you do something about it. So one of my members, who happens to be a laser physicist, him and his wife, they own a company that installs fiber optics in the city of New York. Okay, 3 out of 5 boroughs they have the contract for. Verizon has the other 2. So I have a thing on my website called the EMF Bootcamp where it teaches you basics of how to hack your environment, with these devices. And I hired an electrical engineer for everybody to learn. So he bought a house in Brooklyn and he tested it, and it tested pretty well for this area. So he bought it and he lived there for 2 or 3 years, and he noticed about 2.5 years, he told me, that 6 out of 8 of his neighbors came down with cancer. And he was like, this is crazy. I wonder why this is happening. So he's got 2 sons. And, I told you that him and his wife are both laser physicists. They do a lot in fiber optics. The kids started playing around with his Gauss meter, and his Gauss meter measures magnetic fields. The kids came in and told this person that, Dad, you need to look at this. And it was redlined. It was over 2,000 Gauss. And he couldn't figure out why this was happening. So him and his brother put painter's tape, that blue tape, everywhere in the living room. The center of the living room is where the biggest field was coming. And they traced it up into the wall, up into the ceiling, and they knocked the hole in the ceiling to look. And it turns out the gas line and the water line were there. They followed it all the way to the street. Now, I told you, this guy's got a really big company. So he's got a construction arm. He follows it out with a snake through the plumbing system all the way to a tree. And the tree is right outside, big maple tree like you have in New York City. And what did he find? The roots of the tree grew into the Con Edison lines. And the reason he only saw the magnetic field is the electric field was dissipated by the ground. So he had just an isolated magnetic field, and he knew exactly what the cause was. And he went to all the different places on the block and found that the Gauss meter was off the charts in those places as well. So here's the point. He tested his environment. But you can't assume that how it is today is going to be how it is next week, especially when you have those idiots outside your window putting the new 5G cables in, or putting DirecTV on your neighbor's house, or putting the smart meter in your neighborhood. And that's the mistake that most people make. That's the biggest mistake that I think that allopathic doctors and functional medicine doctors don't realize. They don't realize the number one question they should ask as soon as somebody comes in, tell me about your environment. And when they tell me, I want to know how they know. Do they have these devices? Do they understand how to use them? And do they need to be doing it? I tell people it's kind of like your carbon monoxide sensor in your house. You should go around with these devices once a month in your environment and never assume anything.
So what does that look like here? So we get one of these meters, maybe a tri-field. What are the key meters everyone should have at home to test these things?
Well, instead of wasting our time talking about that, I would tell you, this guy that I told you in Seattle, his name is Scott Compton. He wrote a guest blog about his experience. In the sites there, I list all the meters that everybody should consider. It has Amazon links to all of them, and you can learn about them and pull them up. Because I don't want people going out and spending money on things that really is a waste. I want them to start with the simple things. So for example, a trimeter is relatively cheap, and the cornet meter, the RF meter, is also pretty cheap. I think those are the two that people will start with. But then I think you need to realize, depending on your environment, for example, if you live in a city, you absolutely need a Gauss meter. You absolutely have to have it. And if you live in a downtown area, there's no question you need to have it. But then there's other effects, and the effects, in fact, I just wrote about this. I wrote an ALS blog because the upcoming NFL draft. And I did it because there's a couple of players in this draft that have significant soft tissue injuries. One of them is named Marshawn Lattimore from Ohio State. He's the best cornerback in the draft, but he's missed 2 seasons at Ohio State. Well, he's a black kid at the 42nd latitude in Columbus. Okay?
Yeah.
And see, everybody, he's had surgery to fix this. The kid's a phenomenal player, but if I was the Chicago Bears, if I was the New England Patriots, I wouldn't draft this guy. Now, if I was the Jacksonville Jaguars or, say, the San Diego Chargers, he'd be much higher on my list. Why? Because I understand that he needs to be in a much higher light environment. Best place for him is probably Miami. Now, does anybody in the NFL understand this linkage? No. And why do these players develop neurodegeneration when they're 40, 50, and 60 years old? Guess what? The link is just what I told you. Altered light frequency.
So you're saying more melanin in the skin is going to decrease the UV absorption, essentially.
Right. Where did black skin come from? From the equator, my friend. It protects you. That's the reason why when you said to me earlier, shade is one way to do it, but how did nature do it? It made dark skin first. Why? Because that's where we evolved. We evolved in the East African Rift. Okay? White guys like me and you, we came much later when we went to higher latitudes. And that's where SNPs came from. That's where heteroplasmy rates changed. Remember, there's an equatorial DNA, but there's all these other DNAs for our mitochondria that are altered based on where we live and what is the key driver.
And what test are you running for the SNPs? So is that the 23andMe? And what are you testing? The
23andMe is one thing you do, but there's now SNP testing that you can order through Genova and some of the other functional places to figure it out. But the key thing that I want to know is I want to assess somebody's redox potential almost as soon as they come in. And when I say redox potential, what am I saying? I'm saying the amount of net negative charge in the body. So how could somebody simply do that? If you had a body voltage meter, you could tell that way. I think there's an easier way. I like looking at labs. That's why I told you earlier when we talked, read my Redox RX. There's 30 different labs there that tell you how they all link into it. Are some of them simple, Justin? Yeah. You know what one of the simplest ones are? Next time you talk to somebody, look at their teeth. Look at the color of their teeth. If their teeth are naturally white, that's a pretty good sign. Their redox potential is good. If their teeth are yellowed, guess what? Their redox potential is not as good as they think. And the reason why is dentin and enamel. One is both of them are fluorophore proteins. They fluoresce when the cells are emitting specific frequencies of light. Do I have a blog on that too? Remember what you asked me, Jack? You used to be an oral surgeon. See, this stuff, every place you look, you can find an answer. But the problem is, and I always say this, Justin, and I say this, it's really important. Humans are really good at seeing, but they suck at observation. And let me just tell you something. What makes a really good doctor, what makes a really good scientist, is the people that observe nature very carefully and don't put their precepts, their beliefs, their dogma on the observations they see. And one of the biggest problems I think I see in modern science is that we have allowed dogma, beliefs, and paradigms to affect the way we study things. For example, you know how there's this big thing right now in nutrition where there's a fight between the low carb and the high fat people and all this nonsense. You know where all of our ideas for ketosis came from? From metabolic ward studies that were done in the 1940s and 50s that you can read about in many books. Let me ask you a question, Justin. Where are metabolic ward studies done?
Well, they're done in a hospital inside. There's obviously going to be no UV exposure either. Yeah.
Under blue light. Okay. Now, you open up Albert Schweitzer's book or Western A. Price's book, Western Diseases of Civilization.
It's all in the environment.
And guess what you see? You see these guys that look like Adonis that are 70 years old. You know what the difference is, my friend?
One's
They're in their
outside,
natural environment.
Yeah.
They're in their natural environment, and we study zoo animals, and we think that's the same. And it's that simple. Remember when we talked earlier about the tree? I said to you, would a tree grow with a tarp over it? And you got it immediately. Hopefully the people listening to this got it. Well, what am I saying to you? The beliefs that we have in nutrition, I don't believe anything that's published in nutrition data. Why? Because it's never been studied the right way.
So how are you applying it? How are you eating? So walk me through that. I know you mentioned it doesn't matter as much. So give me the rundown right now. It's getting to be
very simple.
Spring, summer, more carbs now?
No, yeah. And it's very simple.
What is breakfast?
What grows in your environment. Eat what grows in your environment. That's it. Let me explain this to you, because this is important. What is the entire food web of this planet built on, my friend? It's called photosynthesis.
Yep.
Okay? The entire food web. So that means that when you talk about food, you need to understand light. So can you eat a pineapple in Bangor, Maine right now? The answer is yeah, you can. You can go into Whole Foods and get it. But what does nature say about that? The answer is no. You can't do that because it never grows. Therefore, when you're the stupid idiot that eats the pineapple at the 47th latitude, even in May, you've created a mismatch. You've created a gut problem. You've created a mitochondrial problem. And you don't think it's a big deal. Why? Because you don't understand how photosynthesis links to those electrons, to the ground state and this state. And what is your body designed to do? Capture that. Well, if you do that, your respiratory proteins are stretched out, you can't capture that.
So what does that look like for you? So you're saying lower carb, higher fat with a more northern?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
I'm saying your environment dictates what you eat.
So let's go over a couple examples. Go ahead, yeah.
For example, I'm not, in December, going to eat kumquats. I'm not going to eat pineapple. I'm not going to eat coconut. Now, I happen to live at a latitude where those things are present. 28th latitude is most things you can get. So what I usually do in the wintertime, I'm going to be ketotic, and I'm going to drink more water, and I'm going to be more connected to cold and the light environment around me. So I'm going to be pretty naked a lot of the year with my shoes off in the backyard when it's like between 30 and 50 degrees here. Now, what happens in the summertime? The summertime, my carbs increase all the way up to June 21st. Why? That's the summer equinox.
Yeah.
When do they start to decline? From that time. The time that I eat no carbs, the only time I'll eat no carbs is for about the 2 weeks before and after December 21st.
Got it. So right now you're on a higher carb cycling? Or
correct.
Okay, good. Higher carb right now, and then fat, is that pretty high as well?
I wouldn't say pretty high, because you don't need a ton of fat in the summertime when you live at the 28th latitude. Remember what I told you before about the Messiah and the Hazda?
Yeah.
Got it? It's that's why I said the paradigm that you believe in. And I'm glad that when your nonverbal communication talking to me is very interesting, because when I say something to you, I know you're like, man, I don't know if I'm buying that. That's the belief system that you got. You have to realize that when you understand what I'm saying, this seasonal approach is linked to photosynthesis. And every place on this planet is tied to that. Just because humans have changed that system doesn't mean we can do it. You know, it's like we can do it, but should we do it? That's the question we need to ask people. And that's not the question that most people do.
So how do you tie in cold? How do you tie in the cold thermogenesis with the sun and with the UV? Like, how do you package this all together? Yeah,
I'll try to make it as simple for you as possible. The easiest way is to understand what does cold do. It condenses the respiratory proteins. So that means it brings it closer together. Anytime they come closer together, it makes electron tunneling easier. So even if you have fewer electrons or fewer higher powered electrons, the fact that they're closer, you're more energy efficient. So can you be more energy efficient doing that? Yes, and it turns out when you're energy efficient, closer together, that means you release more free heat. When you release more free heat from your mitochondria, what does that do to the water around it? It heats it up. What happens to water when it's heated? It shrinks. That's how the respiratory proteins come together. You don't boil water and stick it in your fridge right now. What will happen in 2 hours? It explodes. Because water is different than just about every liquid on this planet. Thermodynamically, it expands when it cools and it shrinks when it's heated. But we don't realize that that's the huge reason mitochondria release heat. Then I want you to look at something else, Justin. I want you to think about this. What is the basic plan for photosynthesis? CO2 plus water and sunlight make sugars.
Right.
You know what mitochondria does? It reverses the equation. It takes glucose, makes CO2, and makes water. How do you like that?
Interesting.
Both of them are endosymbiont bacteria that we have figured out. In other words, this is the yin and this is the yang. So a mitochondria can only work when this is working right. So let's go back to your original question. You said, tell me about your food. And you wanted to jump straight to what every functional doc does. And I said, I'm not letting you do it. It's the biggest mistake y'all make every time. And you need to understand why my perspective is what it is. And when you do, you start to go, So for example, I'll give you another good one. I don't know where you're located, but just
I'm in Austin, Texas. So I'm at a nice lower latitude.
Yeah, you're close to me as well.
Are you in Nashville or New Orleans?
I'm in New Orleans.
New Orleans, okay. New Orleans.
So the issue is, say if you lived in Austin, but say you were a computer programmer and you're inside on the blue light all day. So you were giving yourself a chronic summertime signal, okay? And say you ate carbohydrates probably 24/7. What do you think the result would be? You're going to get just about every disease on the planet.
Right.
What the problem is that we believe that the food is what caused it. What we don't realize is that the blue light is what really caused all the changes, and it stretched out the respiratory proteins because the mitochondria don't work. So when you give somebody a prescription who does that, ketosis, it helps them because what does ketosis do? It shrinks things down a little bit, but not enough. And those people stay in ketosis. Why is chronic ketosis a bad thing to be in? Because you never get to autophagy. In other words, you never get to recycle your new mitochondria. See, the key thing with our bodies.
How about if you intermittent fast, though? If you combine some intermittent fasting in there, couldn't you increase the autophagy?
That's the key things to do. But what happens, like when you follow like my leptin reset, what you'll find is people who have to eat like 6 times a day wind up finding out within 6 weeks they can eat 3 times a day. And then eventually when you do it long enough, you're only going to eat once a day. I only eat once a day. That's it. And it's usually at the 4 to 6 p.m. window. Okay. Now in the beginning, when I started all this, I had to do it differently. Why?
Yeah.
Because my Ferrari was a Nissan Sentra blowing black smoke.
Got it.
See how the pieces fit together? They're all dynamic. And, I think in both of our paradigms, how we were trained, is we don't realize that it's that dynamic. We think it's more static, and I think it makes more sense to our brain to think about it that way because it's easier to understand. But I don't buy that. And I don't buy that now because I've become a mitochondriac. I've become that person that is understanding nature through that organelle. And that organelle was the key to make me understand food differently because I began to look at food in terms of chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, in terms of an exciton, what an exciton is, how it's made, and how food gets its basic energy. Food is basically light energy. It's no different than that. And the key to deciphering, I think, to understand, we need the Rosetta code. That Rosetta code is built into the latitude, altitude, and population density where we are. That's actually how the food chain is optimized for this planet. That's the reason why people around the equator can eat a much higher carbohydrate diet and not get any problems with it. It's also the reason why the Inuit diet prior to 1950 was highly ketotic because they were never around UVA or UVB light except for 3 to 4 months out of the year. So most people don't even realize that vitamin D foods, there's only 2. It's seafood and mushrooms. Well, guess what? That's a big staple of the Inuit diet. But to get the vitamin D you need, you got to eat the eyeballs and you got to eat the skin and the fish. Well, the Inuits do that. That's the reason why they're the indigenous people that did well there. But
so when you're eating at 4 p.m., that 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. window, are you still getting adequate calories during that 2-hour time period? And are you going to tell us what you're eating? Come on, what's the secret?
Well, I mean,
I want to hear it.
I'm trying to think what I ate for dinner last night. I know what I had. I had beets that were baked, and I took the greens off the leaves, cut them up, and cooked them in butter with some spices. Like I think I put basil, oregano, salt and pepper, and turmeric. And I had sausages, pork sausages. And pork is a much bigger part of my diet this time of the year because you need the cysteine content because of the sunlight. And if you want to know why, I'm not going to get into it. I got a blog called Energy and Epigenetics 12. Cysteine is the rarest amino acid. It's the one that glutathione is made out of.
Huge, yep.
So you have to know that when you live in a strong solar environment, you want to have a little bit more sulfur in your diet. And it turns out that sulfur, sulfated cholesterol and sulfated vitamin D3 is the key to high solar environments in terms of skin thickness. You know, it goes back to the solar callus that you and I talked about, you know, in the past. All that stuff is yoked together.
And I've seen people do sunlight UV exposure, and they've kind of like chronic hemochromatosis, the elevated iron levels, very high ferritin, 300-400 levels, and they've seen their ferritin levels drop. Do you see that as well clinically?
Yeah, I mean, you can see a variety of different things, but here's the funny thing. If you really pay attention, this to me is one of the most interesting things that's happened in the last 2 or 3 years. The hospitals are now starting to look at zip codes in terms of diagnosis codes. So we in medicine are now seeing some very interesting trends develop. In other words, certain diseases tend to show up more in certain zip codes. And no one in epidemiology kind of knows why. And I think I've kind of figured it out that it has to do with that local environment. The non-native EMF in different environments is highly variable. So when, say, you're using ferritin, as you said before, you may find one person from one part of town have a very variable response compared to somebody else. And you're going to say, oh, wait a minute, I'm at the 28th latitude. It shouldn't be like this. Well, I'll give you, for example, I happen to have a friend who lives in Austin, who lives around that Barton Springs place, and he just recently moved somewhere else. His results have been radically different in the new part of Austin that he lives in. And I told him, I gave him a couple ideas to what to check out. And he wound up buying an acoustimeter, and he wound up buying a flicker monitor. And he found out that the lights in his new neighborhood at nighttime had a much higher flicker effect, and that was the cause of his problem. So I said, the simple thing is when you go out at night, make sure most of your skin's covered and make sure your eyes are protected. And flicker is really hard to protect yourself from. I told him, because you moved from a low flicker environment to a higher flicker one, and he found out that Austin had just changed the lights in the street in this neighborhood like 3 months before he moved there.
Got it. Interesting. And then what do you think about UV and thyroid? Is there any specific dose of UV? Good.
Yeah,
so
hypothyroidism is absolutely a deficiency.
How does it affect reverse T3 though, and RT3 and the deactivation of the thyroid?
Reverse T3 is leptin resistance. Remember what I told you about this semiconductive circuit, the retina, SCN, and leptin receptor. It's got to work properly. To turn this on, once the leptin receptor is properly turned on, you don't make any reverse T3. Everything goes to T3 because what is T3? It's thermogenic. It makes and releases heat from the mitochondria. That shrinks water. All these things I gave you already. It's all there. The key thing is when this semiconductive circuit's broken, that's what causes this problem. And that's why reverse T3 goes up. And that's why leptin resistance functionally is a light-mediated problem.
Now, I've also heard you talk about leptin resistance and using HCG to modulate leptin resistance as well.
You can. And that is one of the things I did a long time ago before I realized how the physics of the organism truly works. And I call that one of my, seminal biohacks to figure out why this worked. Because, most allopathic doctors, and I'll be the first one to be honest with you, I thought 15 years ago that HCG was a bunch of horseshit. And then when I started to learn about all these intricate brain circuits, I started to realize, actually, there is a role for this, and it actually is uncovering how this whole system really works. And the problem is, I think the practitioners that use HCG don't realize that it's kind of like using rhodiola for adrenal fatigue. It works while you use it, but as soon as you take the stimulus away and don't realize that you have to have the light change with it, it's an epic failure. It's great for clinicians who keep selling to people because it's like it's what I call a wallet biopsy or annuity. But you cannot sustain weight loss by using HCG until you fix the light environment that the patient's in. So
you got to get the light and then the EMF dialed in. That totally makes sense. And then you mentioned some stuff about the NFL a little bit earlier. What's your take on this TCE, the traumatic chronic encephalopathy, the Will Smith movie? What's your take on that as a neurosurgeon? What do you see coming into your clinic? And would you let your kid play football?
Read my current blog. It says the implications.
We'll link to it. What's the Reader's Digest version though?
Reader's Digest version, anything that disrupts electron chain transport in mitochondria is something you need to stay away from. And what happens is these kids start off when they're younger, and you have to realize the more damage they have when they're younger, the worse it is when they get older. In terms of what I let my kids play, knowing what I know now, no. I wouldn't let them play soccer. I wouldn't let them play hockey. I wouldn't let them play football. But I would let them play, like if they didn't play when they were younger and they wanted to play like, say, late in high school or college, I personally think that's the reason why. If you think about, because, we got the NFL draft coming up next week. It's kind of an interesting thing. I look at like this kid from Washington University. I want you to think about, this is going to be really interesting for you. John Ross ran the fastest 40. He ran 4.22, but when he ran it, he actually pulled up lame. He pulled up a hip flexor, and he didn't run the second one. He was inside the RCA dome in Indianapolis under a xenon blue light that was not run by a DC converter. It was run by the AC current. So he was set up. The flicker effect of those lights are ridiculous. But he still ran that time. That tells you, if you can run that fast, it tells you your redox potential is good. But I want you to think about where he originally lived. He lived in Los Angeles. He used to play on Snoop Dogg's team when he was a young kid. And Snoop Dogg said, this kid was the fastest kid ever. So I want you to think now, when he went to Washington at the 45th latitude, that's where he went, to University of Washington, he tore both ACLs, and they repaired them, and obviously he's doing pretty good. But if you're an NFL GM asking me the question you just asked, would you draft John Ross knowing that he's going to have a 10 or 15-year career? The answer is no, I would not. But will he be good the first 5 years of his career? The answer is yes. If you happen to be the Seattle Seahawks, the New England Patriots, the Green Bay Packers, would I draft John Ross? The answer is no, because they play at a high latitude light. If you are the Miami Dolphins, the Tennessee Titans, the Houston Texans, the San Diego Chargers, my answer would be yes. Now I'm going to teach you something why I just said that. When you get off this podcast with me, I want you to open up a Google box and look at the top 20 rushers in the NFL history. You know what you're going to notice? About 19 out of 20 of them?
They're all south?
The southeast of the United States.
Yeah.
So everybody knows the most famous guy, Emmitt Smith.
Emmitt Smith.
You know where he's from?
He's from Florida. He went to the University of Florida, so probably Florida area.
Where's he from? Pensacola, right on the beach of the
Florida,
Gulf of Mexico. Okay? The Gulf of Mexico happens to be one of the best places to grow up. Why? 600 miles from Pensacola. Do you know what's in the bottom of the Gulf?
What?
A hole that an asteroid hit 65 million years ago. And do you know where you came from? You came from that change, because what wiped out there? Dinosaurs. And what came? The age of mammals. What was different? Mitochondria. See that? You're back to the same story again. And you didn't even realize it. The only guy on the top 20 list that breaks the rules is John Riggins.
How about Jim Brown, though? Didn't he play for the Browns? That's Cleveland.
Played for the Browns, but where was he originally from? And
he went to Syracuse too. So he
went to Syracuse. But what time did he was in college? Late 40s and early 50s.
Yeah, 57, first-round draft pick.
Let me ask you a question. Was there Google then? Did you come in to do what we're doing now, or was he outside riding his bike playing ball in the sun?
Yeah, he was from Georgia originally. So, yeah.
There you go. See that? Pretty shocking.
But he was north. He was up north for a good 15 years, though. So that's still pretty good.
He only played how long, my friend? 9 years.
10 years. Let's
think about it.
But for running back, that's pretty good, though.
Well, was he smart to bail when he bailed?
Oh, yeah, definitely smart.
Well, and here's the point that I'm trying to make to you. We can have this conversation. Most people who are sports fans never even think about these things. So I'll give you another, for example. I'm trying to give you a really controversial one. I'm going to talk about Junior Seau. You know, he's comes from the middle of the Pacific Ocean. He played in San Diego. He was probably
USC.
the most dominant linebacker, right, of his time. But when did he start going south? When he left San Diego.
Patriots.
And everybody knows what happened to him after that. He wound up killing himself. And why is that the case? Where do humans bury the mitochondrial density, my friend? Here in their heart. What is the other thing that we know about NFL players? Their cardiac longevity also isn't good. See, the thing is, the way mitochondria work is very similar to a star. Those guys are really good early in their career, but they burn out fast. That's what we call a blue straggler star.
Yeah.
What are the stars in the world that live the longest. It's red giants.
Mm-hmm.
Think about all the things that we said earlier about cytochrome C oxidase, heme proteins, and red light chromophores. And then what we just say about blue light. Blue makes you burn and live faster. It speeds time up. Red slows time down. So does purple. And the reason why purple works is because purple electrons actually get sliced by this deli slicer in your mitochondria called the Q cycle. And the Q cycle is run by coenzyme Q10. One of the biggest functions of the Q cycle is to take a highly excited electron and turn it into light frequencies in the red range. So what are we doing with purple light? We're slowing it down and we're turning it into red light for cytochrome C oxidase, which is the third cytochrome. And what does that do? It makes more ATP. We're back to the story we started with. 2/3 versus 1/3.
1/3, right.
And that's the reason why UV light isn't toxic. That's the reason why dermatologists, and your question before, you asked it to me, I think 3 times about collagen, and I scoffed at you. Yeah. Now you know the reason why I scoffed at you. Because the reason that you've got this belief, the reason why dermatologists have this belief, because they don't understand how light works. The physics of organisms, the physics of cells, once you understand it, makes sense. And I'm going to share something with you.
But you're also not getting burned either. You built up that.
I don't care if I get burned, dude. I don't care if I get burned.
Really?
No, I could care less.
Okay.
And here's the.
But you have a nice thick solar callus now, though, so you built that thing up.
I know, but like next week I'm getting ready to go to Mexico, so the sun is already probably like June and July strong down there. So from that standpoint, I don't really worry about it. But I'm not going to tell you if I would go on the equator and stay out for 12 hours a day. No, obviously I wouldn't do something like that. But once you do this long enough, it becomes pretty obvious and intuitive how long you need to be out there and why you start to see improvements in your own redox potential. But those labs I told you, you don't have to be a doctor to figure this out. You can actually look at them yourself and go through it and say, this makes sense. I mean, one of the easiest things that I tell people, if you're anemic, you need to get out in the sun. And how many times do you hear about the B12 and the D3 story from functional docs? They have no idea. Anybody who's B12 deficient is light deficient. They're solar deficient. They're missing UV and IR light. They're missing purple and red light. And what's the first thing that they do? They reach for the pill thing. And I'm like,
so if you were a vegetarian and not consuming B12, if you were just getting sunlight, would that be enough to replete that macrocytic anemia?
Probably not, because and the reason I say that, it's kind of interesting. Take a look at where vegetarians tend to live, and the best country to go for that is India. If you draw a line in India, right through the middle, below it is all the vegetarians, and above it is all the meat eaters. Yep. What's the difference? The light. Why do vegetarians get away in India? Because they're always in a strong light cycle.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And guess what happens in the north part, up by the Himalaya mountains? They're up at 29,000 feet. Why are all the Sherpas dark skinned? Now you know the reason why. Because they're getting more UV light even though they're at a higher latitude, because their altitude is high. And what else is a benefit? No people are there. Why? Because the mountains are huge.
Right.
See, all the things we talk about, when you start thinking about it, you start going, damn, I actually have never thought about this. And I tell people this all the time. Remember, the terminal electron acceptor for mitochondria is oxygen. How do you make oxygen? UV light hits ozone and you make O2. UV light makes oxygen. And you don't even think about it. But you'll have this thing, oh, well, I can't go outside because UV light's bad for me. Why? Because that got put in your head by your mother, your doctor, or somebody else. That's the reason why you feel that way. And for me, strong UV light usually means that you're going to have pretty good O2. And anytime you have O2, O2 is your terminal electron acceptor.
Hey, Jack, I lost you there.
Yeah, you went totally dead. You just froze.
All right, no problem. I'll add this to it. We'll wrap up here. I'm going to start recording again. All right, go ahead. So you were saying there before we got cut off?
I don't know what I was saying.
So you were talking about the redox.
Oh yeah. The redox potential is the key to healthy living. The more net negative charge you have in your body, the better off you do. So the fastest way to develop net negative charge is realizing that you have to have electrons to be programmed by sunlight. And the more electrons that you can contain, the better you are. That's the reason why the density of water at the poles is much higher and colder, because there's more electrons in it. And that's the reason why DHA and the fish that have it tends to swim in colder water. So if you understand this, basically you just need to get your shoes off, take as much clothes off as you're happy with, or go to these clothes that they now make where you can get penetration of UV and IR light. You know, I think one of them is in the UK called Kaniki. That's what I use, so that you can actually be naked without being naked when you're outside, no matter where you are. And this is fundamentally why just about every research study you read about vacation tells you that if you spend 7 days in a strong light environment, that everything gets better. Your depression, your diet, your weight, and everybody says, oh, it's just relaxation. No, it's a lot more than just relaxation. It's about balancing the vagal motor system and the paraventricular nucleus through light assimilation through the skin and the eye. And until we get that story out, we're going to keep making mistakes. And my goal is not to make those mistakes anymore.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that, Dr. Jack. And if you were stuck on a desert island, what would be the one supplement you could bring with you outside of the sun?
Water.
Water. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Great info. Any last words here you want to put out there for the listeners?
No, I just tell you that keep your mind open like a parachute. The thing is, there may be some things that you heard here today that are very counterintuitive to your beliefs and your concepts. And remember, beliefs and paradigms, all they are is precepts of the truth. The truth is always a moving target of approximations. And the truth is designed to evolve. So what may be true today, we may find out tomorrow is not so true. And the best way for us to find these things out is to observe nature in her form. She always morphs. You know, the nature, the environment that we had in the United States in 1900, 1930 is not equivalent to 2017 anyway. And if you don't believe me, just go over to your grandmother's house and ask her how many people she knew that had Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease when she was 6 years old. See, these diseases came out of nowhere. Same thing with autism. Autism is a mitochondrial disease. That's where it comes from. It comes from the modern environment that we built, and we're not cognizant of it. And when you hear that the first time, it shocks you. And it shouldn't shock you. It's the reason why in 1900, colon cancer was the 37th leading cause of cancer, and today it's number 2. Did all of a sudden our genes change in 5 generations to allow that to occur? No, the answer is not. What changed is the amount of assimilation of that energy in mitochondria is what changed the genome. That's the key. There's 2 genomes in us. The one that's the most important is a mitochondrial one. Become a mitochondriac and you'll be a lot better person.
Dr. Jack Kruse,
I appreciate it. www.jackkruse.com.
All right, take care, man.
You too, Jack. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.